It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney acknowledging the limits of the liberal international order. His call for unity among what he called middle powers is resonating with many countries, including India, that are caught in the middle of the tussle between the big powers. And India's having to manage a tough balancing act as it tries to get a trade deal with the US, while Indian exporters grapple with tariffs as high as 50%. Some respite could come with the expected FTA with the EU, which is being touted as the mother of all deals. Let's get to Bloomberg senior editor Menaka Doshi now in Mumbai. So, Menaka, India's in a tough spot right now geopolitically, right?
Paul, find me a country which isn't in a tough spot right now. We walked back from the brink this week in Davos, with a gap opening up between the U.S. and its allies in Europe. And that fracture will have implications for India, both opportunities and challenges. But the one thing that India will be looking closely at is whether China seeks to sort of take advantage of that gap in terms of leadership in the world. I think the second thing important for India right now is, like you pointed out, that U.S. trade deal is still hanging fire. And this is a year of domestic politics, both for Prime Minister Modi as well as for President Trump. He's got the midterm elections coming up in November, and Prime Minister Modi has 3 very important states going to election this year. So it could be a year of even more entrenched positions when it comes to trade. And then the many other things that you referred to, Paul, which is we just came out of a very important state visit from the UAE top leaders. We're going into a very important meeting with the EU top leaders, and hopefully with a deal to be signed after almost 2 decades of negotiation. And then there was that very interesting picture that came out of Davos, where President Trump is signing the agreement for the Board of Peace. And you can see the head of Pakistan in that photograph. And I'm sure India's foreign policy bureaucracy will be watching very, very closely. It promises to be a very interesting year. For more analysis, I'm joined by Pushan Dutt, Professor of Economics and Political Science at INSEAD. Pushan, thank you very much for your time this morning. How do you think India is placed in 2026?
So I think India still has to do the fundamentals right, okay? So it has to focus on growth. It has to focus on employment. Yes, it is geopolitically on the back foot, and it was hit by 50% tariffs, but there are certain nuances to it. So the effective tariff rate imposed on India is actually around 35%, because there are lots of exemptions for goods in the agricultural sector. Right. In whatever is important for the U.S. supply chains, etc. India is also a relatively closed economy, so that's why if you look at the IMF growth forecast, they shaved off 0.5 percentage points, but now they seem to be revising it upwards. In the longer term, India still seems very attractive as a destination for countries outside, because unlike China, it is a consumption-driven economy. So China does not do consumption. India does a lot of consumption, and also in the long term, it's the only country which provides the scale that Western multinationals might be looking for. So geopolitically on the back foot, but still, focus on the fundamentals, and I think they should be okay.
If I can press you on the geopolitical back foot for a moment, that definitely seemed to be the case last year when we had this falling apart with the U.S. Do you think, though, that India stands to gain a wee bit if this gap between the U.S. and its Western allies persists? It makes countries, especially in the European Union, keener to set up, more intense trade and security arrangements with India.
Yeah, so whenever, we get lemons, you think of lemonade. So I guess, something similar is happening here. But I think it's important to understand that, there are certain upsides to it. India's traditionally very, very protectionist, okay? It has never believed in international trade. And as you just said, it took 2 decades to, get an agreement on the free trade deal with the European Union. So, because of the Trump tariffs, it's actually been pushed into a sequence of trading arrangements with with Oman, with New Zealand, with the European Union, which is the big one, and with the UK. So there might be, India might be opening up its market. It's actually liberalizing its insurance sector. So there are sort of pluses to it. But in geopolitical terms, yes, we are all sort of worried about the world. But, there's another aphorism, which says that, when the strong try to dominate the weak will try to get stronger. And we see this for every country, including India.
I know that there is no replacement for a trade deal with the U.S., given that it is India's largest market. But do you feel that the trade deal with the European Union, which hopefully will get signed next week, can help fill in some of those gaps?
So this is not first best, right? The U.S., of course, also is a very consumption-driven economy. Imports as a percentage of GDP might be low, but imports as a whole is very important for many exporting countries, especially in Asia, including India. So it's not so much of a replacement, just for India. This is a challenge that everyone is facing. So if you look at China's trade surplus of $1 trillion, it has mainly come from diversion of its exports away from the U.S. market into Europe, into Southeast Asia. And India will have to play essentially similar cards and think about markets in the future. But the European Union, what is it that it's looking for? The European Union essentially right now, it is facing a massive second China shock, so it's trying to pivot away from China, and India is sort of the natural trading partner. What is India looking for? Well, it's essentially looking for investments and technology transfer. Much of this could actually come from China, but China has imposed quite heavy restrictions, like in solar panels recently. So therefore, the Indians will be looking to the Europeans for technology. So in a sense, it's a good match for both parties.
At this point, Pushan, what do you think are the odds of the India and the U.S. finalizing or signing that trade deal?
With Trump, it's always impossible to tell, right? He does have certain core convictions, things like tariffs and Greenland, etc. But he seems to have sort of lost interest in the India-US spat which has happened. So I would not be surprised if there is another trade deal. India has been asked to join the Board of Peace. Pakistan has already joined it, so it hasn't made a statement. But I think that standing up strong to Trump, there are very few cases of it, but the ones who have stood up to Trump, whether it is Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan or China using its rare earths or even Mark Carney, it has not been a complete disaster for them. It's actually been much harder for allies who actually kowtow to Trump. They have faced the brunt of his wrath.
So in many ways, you're saying, Pushan, that, what Prime Minister Modi and his administration did last year, which is not bend to Trump's will, was maybe the right way to go about it instead of quick, easy first concessions. Is that your take?
No, so there are two things going on, right? So we have very few data points, but we have seen that, not all CEOs or political leaders actually have paid the price if they've, stood up strongly to Trump, right? So I think it's important to understand what his core convictions are and what makes him tick, right? So it's the Trump model seems more about praise, submission, paying tribute to him, which India, historically is not willing to do, and that sort of gives Pakistan an edge. At the same time, there are still ways in which India can charm and flatter Trump. And as long as the trade deal is being actually worked out in the lower levels of the government, there is a possibility that, that too might come through.
Okay, before I get to China and Pakistan, I have a quick economic question, Pushan, which is to say that, yes, I know India has come to these trade deals very late and under pressure. But yet, if you look at the full package of what India is trying to do, both externally in terms of trade relations, internally, an attempt to sort of accelerate reforms, what's going on with the currency, which makes our exports more competitive, do you think that puts India on a stronger footing this year than last, or not?
Well, no one is on a stronger footing when the entire international trade order seems to be collapsing, right? So we are, every country, including the U.S., which has, single-handedly triggered the trade war, everyone is on a weaker footing, right? But this essentially, again, so what should political leaders do, whether it's in India or whether it's in Singapore? Well, the first thing is that they have to wake up and recognize the reality. This is what Mark Carney was saying, that, you have to actually recognize the truth as to what the world actually is than what you wish it to be. And the second thing is that, therefore, the currency going forward seems to be essentially economic power, reducing reliance on particular countries, thinking about supply chain chokeholds, thinking about, export controls, sanctions, etc. So essentially building up resilience. We all thought that, Trump was an anomaly and Biden was sort of the norm. But now I think people are realizing that, maybe it's the other way around. So no country can just wait on 40,000 Wisconsin voters to decide its future.
So I guess my question is India doing more or enough to build that resilience?
I think so. So, there are certain things which they have done. Okay, in the financial sector, they've moved forward. They're pushing forward in the defense sector as well. There is a lot of excitement about startups and unicorns in India. The one place where I think India really needs to work on is still attracting building up a massive manufacturing base. Much of this investment is actually flowing to Vietnam, like it did during the first Trump 4. But again, there are certain good examples out there, like Apple. So they have to build up the manufacturing base. And one of the critical areas of reform is actually labor market regulations. They've done GST reforms, but they really have to make it easier to sort of hire workers, fire workers.
Well, in fact, I think India just did announce the implementation of 4 new labor codes. So that box in your list has been ticked. I want to come to 2 quick questions. We have just a few minutes to go. One is that, we've seen China watch all of this play out between U.S. and Europe through the course of this week in Davos, very, very quietly. Over the last few months, India seems to have mended some fences with China. How do you take stock of that relationship and how fearful India should be of China wanting to fill some of this power gap opening up in the Western world?
So, if you look at India and China, given its shared colonial history, given the fact that they're neighbors, geography still matters in this state, they should be natural trading partners. Okay, they also have different kinds of strengths. So, China does production, does not do consumption. India does consumption, doesn't do production, right? So, China has technology to give. India has cheap manpower because, the low-cost wage workers in China, that story is over. So they should be natural trading partners, but at the same time, given the sphere of influence world that we've moved into, where the U.S. says that they're going to dominate the Americas, and China wants to be supreme in Asia. This is going to lead to tensions. They've also gone to a war, and there were other skirmishes and conflicts which have had a scarring influence on India. So building up trust is going to take a long, long period of time. It's not going to be easy.
Okay, a final question then on what India should make of Pakistan in that photograph with President Trump, signing this Board of Peace. No surprise there, but yet it does, in a sense, re-emphasize the fault lines in this part of the world and the backing that Pakistan has from President Trump.
So, I would not take the Board of Peace that seriously, right? Because it started off as a way to sort of, resolve the Gaza conflict and build up Gaza. And now it seems to have morphed into like a United Nations Security Council substitute, right? The rules are not clear. There is an entry fee of $1 billion, which eventually countries have to pay. The way I would sum it is that if you're Board of Peace, then join the Board of Peace. If you look at the countries which have actually joined versus the countries which have refused, like France, Norway, Slovenia, Sweden, there's a huge difference in the degree of institutions and the degree of democracy between this. So this essentially seems to be a club of of countries trying to buy influence by getting into this club. Now, on the other hand, I could also argue this is basically, I think, again, what Mark Carney said yesterday, which is that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, right? So it's going to be difficult, but I'm not that optimistic. In 3 years' time, if Trump is gone, which is a big if, I think this Board of Peace will sort of fade into obscurity.